mean, my understanding of trauma and the teachings that I've had related to trauma is that trauma isn't exactly the memory of what's happened to us. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle and kind of get stuck when they start to work on themselves and perhaps look at healing trauma, because for a lot of people, they don't remember anything. So for a lot of people, it's not this one big event. It's a series of small events that are unprocessed that keeps loading up into the body. And so trauma is the memory and the energy that's locked in the body. So I truly believe that when you want to start on your healing journey, I really believe that trauma is the first place that we need to go, and also look within the body, because that's where it's held. And this starts sometimes before birth. If you go back to developmental trauma, you know, a fetus can start collecting trauma even before they're born. And so I just think it's so important. I think it's the first point.
But what would be perhaps some examples of trauma?
So how do you mean, like examples of like war, famine, that kind of thing? Okay, so you've got obviously the classic sexual trauma, you've got war, you've got famine, you've got things like relationship breakdowns. Anything that threatens your survival is perceived as trauma, but it can also be small things like an overcritical parent, or it could be a car accident that you've had. It could be someone repeatedly violating your boundaries. It could be all these small little things that add up and overload the nervous system.
Yeah, I guess the two that sprung to mind that I don't think you mentioned, physical abuse would be one.
Yeah.
And grief. So losing a loved one would be, you know, is quite traumatic for most people as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, particularly with grief, using that as an example, there is this misconception that time heals. But I think time solidifies, because it's, if you're not addressing the issues as they come up, it gets locked in the tissues. So the issues live in the tissues. And so that's what creates like this overwhelm on the body, which results in tension. So the more trauma we have in the body, the more rigid and tense we are, because it's creating an armoring, which is technically stopping the system from collapse.
Yeah, I completely relate to that. I mean, I've been studying the emotion code for the last 4 months, and that's exactly what it's all about.
Yeah.
And interestingly, something that is also covered in the emotion code is something called a heart wall, where someone actually ends up with layers of emotions, trapped emotions around the heart, in a way to protect from heartbreak, so to speak. But actually it's detrimental in the long term. But also you can also store emotions anywhere in the body.
Yeah. And I think the way I work in the breath work that I use, which is an amazing system called biodynamic breathwork and trauma release system, it's quite a mouthful, we actually work on that armoring. So the first place that a child would develop the armoring is around the eyes, because it stops you from seeing. And then it goes to the jaw, because that's, you know, that stops you like from speaking, so you're holding back. And then the heart protects you from love, and then the diaphragm severs the like sexual energy coming up to the heart, so that creates a severing point. And then you've got the solar plexus area and the hips, which is, it can be sexual trauma or identity trauma. So it's really getting into those areas and helping people release the burden on their nervous system.